that I am live. Comments are not working. Streamlabs OBS. I don't know what's happening with this. Maybe I have to reinstall it. I couldn't reboot it with the same tricks that I used last week, and I'm not going to try. So I am looking at the comments over there, but they are not on the screen. Is what it is. There are actually quite a lot of topics tonight to get through. So let's dive into that. Well, first of all, let's see who's here in the chat. I am looking, of course, you can see the live chat and the live replay with the video if you're watching this recorded. Who have we got? We've got Andrea Moboya. Hi, indeed, good to see you. Hiking Japan 123. That's a username I haven't seen before. Excellent to have you. Remember, as you've just done, if you add Mark Kiko Simon, you'll be able to. It'll flash orange, which will grab my attention. So that's always a good thing. Good to see you. Andrea Moboya is looking sleepy. Well, we'll do your best to wake you up. The party is always started, but it started right now. Bold Berlitz boy, good to have you with us. Remino, we're waiting. Quick. Yes, I am definitely here. We've got Mr. Cordy Champ hanging on for dear life. Hope we made it in time. Tokyo 503. Yeah, indeed, the story of the week. The good news is that the rainy season has ended, and the bad news is that the rainy season has ended. We are now in summer in Tokyo, and we are about to head into the pit of Hades, basically, in terms of heat. So yes, I whenever I was reading people complaining about the weather during the week, I kept thinking of the Mariah Carey song Someday. You know, someday the one you gave away will be the only one that you're wishing for. Yeah, we'll be wishing that we were back in 25 degrees and calm drizzle. Well, it's not really rainy season in Japan, isn't? Well, I guess some places in Kyushu they certainly had flooding and so on, but generally in Tokyo. But this year it was just super gloomy. So yes, anyway, rainy season has ended. That is true. By the way, remember, please say hello if you're in the comments. I love just to see who's there. It's always nice to say hello to everybody. Who else have we got here? We've got Quinn Rankid. Excellent to see. Oh, comments have jumped. Let's go back. I don't want to miss anybody if I can avoid it. We've got state of disaster in Victoria. Yeah, that's a thing. Okay, we're just going for a state of emergency. You guys are all the way there. Although you're still not really locking down as much as like New Zealand did. That was a conversation I had with my mum in Australia, who's in Queensland today. Queensland, by the way, Victoria, I know that you're worried about all the idiots in Melbourne, but I think Queensland probably has your beat. I mean, I don't know how they're doing better down there, but from the sounds of things. Quint Rankid, excellent to see you. We've got Boom, indeed. We've got a comment. Bald Bullets Boy saying that you got Corona, everybody. I assume you mean the brand of beer. That was held for moderation, that comment. I guess it's sensitive nowadays that the auto moderation is tagging that one. Who else we got in here? We've got BTC Chiba. Excellent to see you, BTC Chiba. Good to have you here in the chat. Chris Jack. Good to see you, Chris Jack. Nick F. Will says hello. We've got Odie Jr. saying boom. Who else we got in here? We got Nick F. I said. We've got Aaron. Good to see you. Who took your beer? Asks Bald Berlitz boy. I've got Sergeant Bilko. Salutations. Good to see you and indeed everybody else. And I'm caught up. Some comments targeted to me. We've got indeed from Sergeant Bilko and from Andrew Moboy. A state of disaster, meaning police have powers to question people, arrest and fine people. So yeah, no, that's a thing. The cases, by the way, as you may know, have been jumping here in Tokyo as well. We actually got up to like 472 cases. I think that was a number, 472 or 473 yesterday. So that was on Saturday. The thing with the numbers is that, hey, the FMI, long time, first time, never enjoyed Tokyo in summer. Keep cool, keep safe indeed. The FMI, excellent to have you here in the chat, and that is correct. So the numbers in Tokyo have been jumping, and because they don't really test as much, there aren't as many open testing stations, and the testing places themselves as well don't process as much. We had 292 today, but that's reflecting the tests that were done on Saturday and on Friday. So it's really lately, particularly on Thursday, because we had a long weekend last weekend. So there was a bit of a backlog that came in. That was probably part of what was behind the numbers. But certainly while Tokyo has had the highest numbers that we've ever seen, 472 it looks like. I mean, we could probably go for 500 this week. At the same time, we've had Osaka get more than 200 multiple days. We've had Nagoya Osaka's the number 3 city. Remember Yokohama. Yokohama by the Kanagawa hasn't been that bad. It's right beside Tokyo, but there've been like 70 people every day. Osaka, the number 3 city, it's actually smaller than Yokohama. They've been like, in the 200s. Nagoya has had a good run where they really didn't have that many cases, and all of a sudden they're nearly at 200. Fukuoka had like in the mid 150s the other day, so they're not doing well. Of course, we have the nipple licking problem in Sapporo, although surprisingly, actually, Hokkaido not doing too bad in the circumstances. The place in Japan that is really doing worst right now, Tech Out 2, howdy indeed, good to see you. Thank you for noticing. Bald Billets Boy, the place that is really doing worst as of today, this is featured in here, on a cases per capita population basis, is Okinawa. Okinawa actually had a pretty good run. I mean, they're an isolated little island. Two things have really come and smashed them. I'll talk about this in more detail. One, of course, is that the U.S. military, it was all going fine until the 4th of July, and they decided to have some really, really big, stupid parties where lots of people got coronavirus. Actually, the U.S. military has caused a couple of problems. Again, not the U.S. military as an institution, just idiots within the U.S. military, like the family that came into Tokyo, and when they were being checked in customs, they asked how they were getting to the base, I believe Atami, I think it was, Hiroshima, that they were going to go to. They said that they were going to get a rental car and drive, but then they, after lying about that, they got on an airplane, and it turned out that their test came back that they were positive, and they had to go find everyone who was on the airplane. And there have been a few cases like this, but the 4th of July parties, of course, triggered a whole bunch of cases. The other thing, of course, the government Go To campaign, which is still going on. Everybody's gone and got trips to Okinawa. And that's had two results. Lots of people are flooding into Okinawa, including now there are lots of cases in Okinawa. So it seems like directly the government campaign is partly also contributing to the increase of cases down there. The other problem is, of course, that Okinawa itself has already run out of capacity in its hospitals. Because, again, for non-symptomatic cases, they put them into hotels, but there are no hotels free because they've all been booked by tourists. It's ridiculous. They're actually declared a state. I'll go into more of the details of that. Gifu Prefecture and Okinawa Prefecture have both declared states of emergency, which the national government doesn't want anyone to do. They want them to wait for the national government, and Okinawa government is basically saying, this is your fault, national government, screw you, we're declaring a state of emergency, and they've done that. But yes, so lots of things going on this week, lots of topics to talk about. Who else is here in the comments? Let's see, we've got Theodore Sharp, I think I just saw. Hey, Theodore Sharp, excellent to see you. And who else have we got? That is it, Aaron, Theodore Sharp. I think we've got everybody in the comments. Remember as well, so yes, Nagoya also now on a bit of a downward, everywhere is on a downward spiral. In terms of the status, though, the reason the government, again, another topic, but the reason that the government says that we are not in a state of emergency is because in spite of the very high numbers, much higher than during the first wave, the cases are largely being captured. Well, at least it seems like that the testing, the positive rate on testing ratio is around 5%, which implies that they're doing thorough enough testing. They're testing 20 people for every case that they find, so they really are being at least fairly thorough. And all the people who have it, or the vast majority, like 70% of the cases, are people in their 20s and 30s. So generally they're not developing into serious cases. So for all of these cases that we've had every day, 400, nearly 500 people in Tokyo, right now in Tokyo, the number of patients in ICU are 16. It's crazy, right, that there's so few serious cases in Tokyo in the circumstances. Now, of course, the problem is that even if these people are meeting or encountering any elderly people, there's the problem that, sooner or later, I don't know what's happening right now. I guess elderly people are just hiding because, there are all these stupid sort of young people going around, and it is clearly spreading. But at the same time, the other thing that's kind of becoming more and more clear in the news is that even if you don't get it very seriously, even if you're almost asymptomatic, the syndrome that people seem to be getting after they've got it, where for months, that it seems to mess up their blood, right? I mean, and I think originally we thought of this as a pneumonia thing, and now people understand it as a blood disease. And people are getting like blood clots in the brain, they're getting heart and organ problems, from the clots and all the problems that you get with the blood from this. And it seems like people get pretty messed up from this for a long time. So that is again why the government still seems okay to be promoting travel, which is just amazing to me. But the numbers are big, but we are not going into another quasi lockdown. Tokyo is considering it, but there you go. So that's pretty much just what's generally happening. Andrea Moboy, documentary tonight. Ari Hiroshima is at 75 years on the 6th of August. Indeed it is. They spoke to children who survived, obviously older now, indeed. Heard on SBS that theatres in Tokyo were opening this week. Well, theatres are open. There was a particular theatre called Kabukiza. That's not in my featured story, so I can talk about this, which is sort of like the main Kabuki theatre, which has been closed since March. They reopened, but they reopened with a whole bunch of sort of countermeasures to prevent spread of disease in the theatre. For example, they've spread everybody out, they've got shielding, they've actually stopped the performers from singing too loudly or doing any sort of loud parts that they normally do. They've made a lot of modifications to try to make this an acceptable sort of reasonably safe thing. So yeah, that's definitely happening. On the A bombings as well, I didn't actually cover that. I guess that'll be next week that we'll have those anniversaries. They are significant, but at the same time, it is worth. I mean, I think I always bring this up, but I've been reading some stories this week again, which I haven't tagged. But in the end, well, there's two things. One, I mean, it's still questionable whether the A-bombs actually directly led to the end of the war. I mean, the big playing up about the effects of the A-bombs was partly that the US was definitely interested in letting the world know it had these bombs, and particularly Russia, to demonstrate that not to do anything with it. But in terms of the destruction course, essentially the thing with the A-bombs was, I mean, of course there was radiation, and there were this was a new type of very scary weapon. But the Americans who had been outraged at things like Dresden and firebombings in Europe, and these were considered, Churchill wouldn't praise the bombers when he was giving credit to the armed forces after the war. He excluded the bombers, because he thought what they did was so outrageous. It was completely normalized in Japan that they were, when I think the first city that they actually used incendiary bombs over was Toyama. And this is basically where they realized that the cities were made out of wood and they could just set them on fire on purpose and kill tens of thousands of people. And they just did this systematically across most of the cities in Japan, including Tokyo. And this was the thing. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, most of the loss of life was from the firestorms that were created after the explosion. It was, they created such enormous sort of spans of fires that in themselves became a storm that sort of spread out across the whole cities. And you talk about cities that suffered comparable, at least per capita, sort of loss of life and damage. I mean, most of Japan. I saw some statistic today that something like 25% of all the houses in Japan were burned. And it's kind of funny in a way. Of course, it's important that we remember the A bombs, partly for the purpose of making sure that they're not used, that we don't allow the use of nuclear weapons again. But at the same time, people sort of overlook the incredible similar damage that was done by the use of dropping basically napalm from the air all over, regular. And these were not always like these. This was not smart bombing. These were not always military targets. These were often cities that had little to do with war production. And I've a big problem with that as well. Certainly, it is that time of year that, we solemnly remember the end of the war and the events of the war. Although, again, I know people sometimes object to to the Japanese. They see it as a time for the Japanese to feel sorry for themselves. That's not, which, as I say every year, that's not what it's about, actually. Then, of course, you get to August 15, the end of War Day, where people often visit Yasukuni, and that's kind of used as a litmus test for Korea, Japan, China relations, and that's always an awkward time of year. But it is an interesting it is an interesting thing. I see some extra names there in the chat. Erin is asking, how am I doing? I have many stories, but looks like I am healthy and positive. I am healthy and positive. Thank you for asking. It might just be the white balance. I've been running, if you've been following me on Twitter, I started taking little posting on Instagram and Twitter photos from my runs. I've been running every second day, basically. I think you guys know the story now. I went running as soon as the lockdown started. We didn't have a real lockdown here. As soon as I started working from home back in March, I ran and I tore my Achilles, and I was basically laid up for 3 months. And then I started jogging kind of slowly, and I've kind of built it up where I'm running every second day. It's really unpleasant running with a mask in the heat right now, but everyone that I see running is running pretty much with masks right now. So yeah, I've lost 10 kilograms. I've actually gone, I've sort of leveled out at about 76, but I started in March. I was 84.8. I was nearly 85. And I get down on a good day, if I'm a bit dehydrated, I get down to 75 point something. So yeah, I am actually as fit as I've ever been. I was getting fit because I wanted to go back to kickboxing and I wanted to have more aerobic fitness, but I'm actually, I'm really fit right now. Thank you for noticing. And I am good. Thank you for asking for that as well. I mean, it's weird. I haven't had any alcohol since February. I haven't ridden in a car or a train or anything. And, it's weird now. And you know what? I think it's going to go easily past the end of the year before I go out or see anybody or ride on any public transport. And that part of it is a bit weird. But settling into the routine, I think I certainly can't complain. I'm very lucky I'm able to work remotely. A lot of people have a lot tougher circumstance than I have, so I'm thankful for that, and I am taking good care of myself. Thank you for asking, Aaron. Very nice of you to ask. Black Tengu, excellent to see you there in the comments. Good to have you in here. Steve from Berkeley. Indeed. Firebombing of Tokyo killed more people than the A-bomb. And the thing was, and it wasn't just Tokyo. When you talk about the firebombings, I mean, most cities in Japan suffered similar types of attacks to Tokyo. It was just because Tokyo was so big and the firestorm here was so enormous, and it did take a lot of life. But yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, Hiroshima and Nagasaki get a lot of focus, and Dresden indeed. But in terms of if you break down and you look at the other attacks that were done on almost every city in Japan, it's actually amazing. I mean, the thing is, I think it was easy to do back in that time because Japanese were so dehumanized by the propaganda of the time. They were seen as fanatical, a nation worshipping the emperor as a god, fanatically, fatalistically going ahead into war that needed to be treated this way. But I think the reason Dresden was more controversial was because people could relate more to Europeans. As someone who lives here for 22 years and sees Japanese as very much human and can recognize that they were not any less human than they are now during World War II, in spite of the circumstances and difficulty and so on, that yes, to me it's kind of shocking that it's not recognized. It's the first rule of war is don't lose, I guess. Through the comments, Andrew Morboy, healthy and positive due to butter stocks. Well, we're certainly keeping good butter stocks, so that's good. Quint Rankin, how am I getting food delivered? Sometimes we're getting it delivered. We had Kentucky Fried Chicken delivered today. I ran, so I figured I could justify it. I've been really cutting back my portions, but honestly, been cooking more. That's another reason I'm healthier. Mostly just taking care, cooking at home, actually not going to restaurants at all. Sometimes some restaurants will sell food out like on the street where you can sort of buy it, and I've been doing that sometimes. So there's a good bread shop nearby which I love to shop from. I've got a couple of supermarkets nearby. So it's mostly, and the thing about having the supermarkets and being home all the time and cooking for myself is I'm eating a lot more vegetables and a lot more fruit, and that's why I've suddenly just dropped 10 kilos. And I was being careful before, so it really says a lot about the, not eating out so much and the benefit of that. So, Bald Billis Boy, better get to the topics indeed. Work tomorrow, better get to it. Razo Gu, let the games begin. Good to have you. Good timing because we're about to get into this. LOL, he did forget. What did I forget? Now I'm going to worry. Never mind. I'm just going to, technical issues. That's right. The chat I couldn't fix it. I'm sorry the chat isn't working. I tried. I'm gonna try to fix it during the week. But anyway, let's get into it. So first bit of good news. A lot of people have been making a lot of noise about the fact that permanent residents or even temporary residents or working visa people or student visa people or marriage visa people, foreigners who live in Japan on a permit with a re-entry visa. When you get a visa, you can apply for a re-entry visa, which allows you, when you fly out, you don't have to give up your gaijin card. You can come back into the country. All of those people, the government sort of arbitrarily said back in March, from this day, anyone who's outside of the country who lives here in Japan is not allowed back in unless they're Japanese citizens. So they allowed Japanese to repatriate. And with that, they weren't putting them into hotels and isolation for 2 weeks. They were basically just saying to people, well, they started up testing at the airports, but they basically said, we want you to voluntarily just stay at home and please don't go out for 2 weeks and call us if there's a problem, which a lot of people ignored, but they did it. It's because, there's too many people basically for Japan to set up a quarantine system. They had no infrastructure for it. And given that it was hard enough just with the Japanese citizens, they said, foreign citizens, sorry, if you're outside of the country, stay outside. I guess the assumption is that for people like me, they assumed that I was going home. The problem for people like me is I've lived here for 22 years. This is my home. And the best case scenario would be that perhaps people were visiting relatives and maybe their family homes outside of the country. In fact, a lot of residents in Japan do still consider places outside of Japan to be home. But this is a problem. Some people were just on business trips. They just happened to be traveling somewhere, and they were denied permission to come back to Japan. And these are people with families. These are people with jobs in Japan. These are people who need to pay rent, who need to employ people. 88,000 residents of Japan. There are 2 million foreign residents living in Japan, but 88,000 of those happen to be outside of the country at the time that they said no permission for reentry. And this has been causing problems for a long time for a lot of people. And the government really, and the media hasn't really paid much attention to it. The government, after a lot of pressure, including externally, has said that they will start allowing people back into the country from August 5th, so from this week. So congratulations if you've been waiting for that for a long time. They're going to allow only 500 people in per day because that is the capacity that customs has for giving people tests. They still can't put them into hotels and isolate them like in New Zealand and Australia just because they don't have the infrastructure for it. So they'll be doing, you'll be required actually to obtain a test within 72 hours of coming back, which in itself logistically is going to be quite hard. But people who have been stuck outside the country will be able to come back. So that is a good thing, I guess. Andrea Morway has a question. Mr. Kori Chep, Hiko Simon, some dumb people drove 300 kilometers from Melbourne to Wodonga to get McDonald's Big Mac. Well, exactly. There are idiots everywhere. Hopefully not trying to get back into Japan. But that said, I mean, this is the thing. A lot of people have been pointing out. These people, they have families, they have jobs, they run companies in Japan, they employ people in Japan, and yet they were sort of being treated, especially when they started talking about letting in special cases of new visa people and not letting people go out with a guarantee that they could return if they were going out for family members dying. And these are people who live in Japan. And, I don't personally feel as wound up about this. I was lucky I was in Japan, and I don't feel like my rights are being so underdone, but it does. I guess for a lot of more sensitive people, I accept that. Of course, I'm a second-class citizen. I can choose to be Japanese if I want to, and I don't. And that's a choice, and I have a certain set of rights. But there again, it does certainly ram home to people that who are considering living here long-term in Japan or going for permanent residency or really contributing to the economy at a time when Japan's talking about getting all the Hong Kong people to fly over to Japan and contribute to the economy here. Well, the government here really, when it hits the fan, they kind of forget about you and they don't care and they don't want you to come back here. And yeah, when you're considering a place to live as a foreign resident, or as a permanent resident even, without becoming a citizen, it shows that on the list of countries, Japan is still not as foreigner-friendly as it's aspiring to be. It wants to be foreigner-friendly, it needs the extra workers, but it doesn't really know how to do it. But that said, good news that after a long time, right, like 4 or 5 months, they're finally going to let re-entrants actually come back. Racism. This is a fun one. So the Ministry of Steve from Berkeley has a question for me. Do I have Japanese citizenship? No, I do not. I have permanent residence, but not Japanese citizenship. If not, do you think you'll eventually work towards that? No. I would if they offered joint citizenship. The way Japan works, and this isn't unique, most countries in the world do not recognize joint citizenship. Countries like the UK and the Commonwealth often recognize joint citizenship because it was really common for people in the UK to move out to other countries, and other countries wanted British citizens to migrate to their countries. So countries with like colonial history often will allow multiple citizenships, and that's really convenient for those sort of people who want to move around like that, and it was a way that facilitated colonization. Most countries don't recognize it. Countries like Germany, countries like Austria, Switzerland, I think is like this. And Japan is one of those countries that if you want to be Japanese, you have to renounce all other citizenships. I'd have to give up my New Zealand passport. I have a New Zealand passport, and I'm entitled to I could apply for an Australian or a British passport if I wanted to, just based on family connections. And these are great things. It's not so much that I care about them. It's nice to have the New Zealand one. It's a great passport, although the Japanese passport is more convenient. But it's something, it gives my son multiple choices, me having that, right? So I wouldn't want to give up those rights for my son to have a connection to New Zealand in the future by giving up my New Zealand citizenship in order to become Japanese. And in the end of the day, the only benefit of having a Japanese citizenship over the only improvement of my current status as a foreign resident is that I'd get to vote. I don't get to vote right now. There's no other real noticeable restrictions. I mean, I guess there are in the COVID-19 thing, but it's not like you have free travel as a Japanese citizen either. You know, I wouldn't want to go through, it still wouldn't be a smart decision to travel. So I would like to vote, I admit, but in the end of the day, I accept the rules. Those are the rules that I came into the country on, so I don't vote. And, you know, New Zealand isn't that great. New Zealand lets foreign residents vote. That's kind of cool, but it actually disenfranchises New Zealanders who travel abroad. So, you know, if you're away for more than 3 years, you lose your right to vote. So it's kind of funny. I like to call myself a North Korean refugee because I'm stuck here. And I'm not able to vote under Japanese or New Zealand rules, or unless I travel back to New Zealand. If I travel back to New Zealand for a holiday, which I hope to do at some point, I immediately get to vote again, at least for the next 3 years. So we'll see. More comments coming to me. I will take all the comments that we can take. Sexius Maximus, good handle. Yes, we've got Andrew Mulboy saying should be addressing HK Hong Kong election issues as members council able to be elected due to comments about communist China. I thought about including the Hong Kong thing, and honestly, it's deep. I'm not well enough informed about it. I have superficial opinions about it, which is that obviously Singapore just had a major national election with worse cases. So clearly the fact that they've disqualified people who are against who have criticized the national security law, and that they've delayed the election there a year, to me that's just obviously basically Beijing cracking down and frankly just turning, I guess you could say, normalizing. This to me is much more aggressive than I expected, and it really sends a signal to Taiwan of what to expect if they ever soften. I mean, to me, in a way, China's kind of decided to give up on peaceful reunification with Taiwan the way that they're aggressively incorporating Hong Kong, and that's it. I'd be really surprised if there's going to be proper free elections a year from now. I mean, it just looks like they are shutting everything down, and the fact that they've named not only members of parliament but actually US citizens who are overseas now as having violated the national security law, it's pretty awful. And you know, and the thing is, it's not even the worst thing. I don't like the US jingoistic, you know, hating China to get votes, and you know, let's ban TikTok and all that sort of stuff. That's a little bit too much for me, and it's frankly cynical because it's not sincere, at least from the commander in chief over there. But you know, but all of that aside, in complete isolation, yeah, China's acting scary. I mean, with Japan, they've just had 112 days in a row now that they've had Coast Guard patrols around these islands that they dispute control of, that Japan has control of, that they dispute, that they think are theirs. And, you know, in the last year, China's gone and converted the Coast Guard from civilian into military, and they've started, you know, investing in bigger ships that basically, and for air patrols as well. They're basically looking to put more ships and more planes around these islands than Japan can match, basically, so that one day they can announce that they're the ones with control and shut it off to Japan. You know, you've got the whole Xinjiang thing, you've got all sorts of stuff, and you know, the Hong Kong thing again, it's just not good. It's scary. That's all I'm going to say on it. I don't have it as a planned topic, but yes, a lot to say today actually, and we're already 11:05. Lots to say already about well, Ben Grant, communism. China isn't communist. It's totalitarian, and it's different. They've given up on the communist ideology. People in China have to buy houses now. They have private property. They're privately owned companies. It's different. It's just the nature of the party that runs that country. It's communism is separate, but real communism, I mean, I suppose you've got a little bit of North Korea, a little bit of Belarus, perhaps, but so I mean, during the 1980s, China pretty much, certainly during the 1990s, China gave up on communism, at least as an economic policy. So that's not the problem. The problem is that you've got a government there that is afraid of its own people because they're holding on to power in pretty extreme ways. So yeah. Quint Ranked, is New Zealand jus soli or jus de sanguis? New Zealand is jus soli. There is no jus. So I assume you mean citizenship by birth as opposed to citizenship via bloodline. No, definitely not bloodline for New Zealand. It's definitely by birth. And again, that's typical because how else was Britain supposed to take New Zealand over and displace the indigenous population if they made it by bloodline, right? This is why, on the one hand, it seems fair and just that America and Canada and Australia and New Zealand recognize citizenship by being born there. But that's just that's how they took it off the indigenous people. I'm pretty sure if the indigenous people made the rules, they would have been different. And this is why the rules are different in countries that didn't have empires. Anyway, all of that. I'm going to keep pushing forward into the comments. Cousins in Hong Kong, auntie and uncle said it's not the same in Hong Kong. Mum was born and grew up in Hong Kong, so it's pretty close to home. Yes, indeed. Mustache. I'll get to the mustache, Bull Bullets boy. It's really alarming how quickly things have changed. I always imagined that that China would take over Hong Kong gradually. That they could take their time. That's the great thing about being a dictatorship. But they haven't. They've really moved in, and frankly, they've taken advantage of the pandemic to do it. And it is nuts actually. And I feel bad for your family being there and the nerves they must have. But I don't know that anyone can really do anything for them other than good on the UK for offering them citizenship. Let's talk about the moustache. That is Ambassador Harris. I should remember what his first name is. He's the U.S. ambassador to Korea, although he is also formerly, I think, a Navy admiral. But Harris, what's his first name? Harris. It says Harris somewhere on here. Harry Harris. Well, that in itself is sort of unfortunate. But his mother is Japanese. His father is American. But he is born in America, an American citizen, grew up and joined the Navy, did all that good stuff, and then became appointed the U.S. ambassador to Korea. However, the Korean people found it, and he's always had the mustache. He was actually like in charge of the U.S. fleet in Asia or something like that. He was in this region for a long time. The Chinese can't stand him because he is actually very sort of he was a big promoter of the freedom of navigation, exercises through the South China Sea, which the Chinese don't like. When they putting him as ambassador to South Korea was a great signal to South Korea that the US was putting a really senior military person as the ambassador there. It was actually a big compliment to the South Koreans as to their importance, and someone who's very familiar with the strategic importance of South Korea. However, the South Koreans couldn't get past the fact that they know that this guy is half Japanese by heritage, not by citizenship at all. And the fact that he, by choice, liked to have that mustache, they pointed out, made him look a lot like the old people on the Japanese 1,000 yen note and the people from the Taisho era around the start of the 20th century who were involved in colonizing Korea. They thought it's like he's trying to look like an old colonial era, sort of a Japanese governor of Korea. And a lot of Koreans demanded that he take off his imperialist, pro-Japanese nationalist mustache. He responded that he is not Japanese, he's American, he wears a mustache by choice, he's free to do it, he understands the sensitivity, but he's not Japanese. And he likes a mustache, let him keep it. And he was actually getting really it got to the point of politicians and so on also suggesting he should shave off his mustache. It was actually a big controversy, and he held on and said, screw you guys, I'm going to keep my mustache. I'm not Japanese. Koreans couldn't see beyond the blood thing, so this is an interesting thing, just how much weight they put on ethnicity over there. There is an image that Japan puts a lot of weight onto ethnicity and heritage as well. It's in comparison to Korea, no. They've been able to sort of hold on to the sort of uglier part of nationalism, which Japan really had to stamp out after World War II. So he suffered this, as I see it, racism, based on his mother's ancestry, that he's taken this sort of criticism for a long time. He agreed to shave the moustache. In the end, it wasn't to appease Korean nationalist racists. It was because it's hard to wear a mask with a moustache. So he's taking it off while he has to wear a mask, and fair enough. But that was a silly story. But unfortunately, you hear this sort of thing a little bit too often. Going back, get to the dude with the mo, the FMI. So I got to the dude with the mo, Quint Rankin, REHK. Have you heard of Aesop's scorpion? I have heard of indeed, we've all heard of Aesop's fables with the scorpion. But yes, the Atomic Tom, good to see you there in the comments, by the way. And Jason's All Sumo channel, very good. Yes, we're gonna get to the Titanic and Breaking Bad and all those good things, although I'm gonna have to speed up. So yes, indeed, Heartbeat, good to see you. LOL, I said Reentry. Whatever gets you going. Yes, the government is not only promoting travel, go to travel, they're promoting workations. I was confused what they meant by this. They said it's when you're in a hotel, or when you're traveling somewhere nice, like you're staying in a hotel or a resort, but you're doing work from there. And I've done those before, and I call them ruined vacations. It's like getting. It's pretty much taking away the purpose of having a vacation. Is when you have to work during a vacation. I've had to do that before, and it's miserable, and it's horrible. The government really is so determined to funnel money from Tokyo and the big cities to their local hometowns, where they can where their backers and the people who fund their election campaigns are. They want to force travel no matter what happens, and the government is directly advocating that people try workations, where people travel to some remote parts of Japan and work from these remote locations. Now, I like the idea of remote work, and I do like the idea of having infrastructure to allow people to work under normal circumstances without pandemic, like from anywhere, to be geography agnostic, to build up small towns by allowing people working in good jobs in Tokyo. That's a good thing. But this workations thing, again, the government is relentlessly promoting travel. I mean, you talk about in Australia how people are panicking, all the dramas going on in Australia with travel restrictions right now. The Japanese government, in the middle of worst numbers, is promoting travel, not only for vacations, which they're subsidizing half the price of travel and accommodation if you use the GoTo travel subsidies. They're actually promoting these workations. They want people to travel, spreading all over the country, working, which, again, would kind of makes sense if we didn't have a pandemic, but horrible and stupid, and in the current circumstances. And honestly, I like the idea of promoting, like moving, like setting up IT infrastructure, cable, fiber optic cables and so on, which Japan pretty much has everywhere to allow you to work seamlessly on video and high-speed internet from remote towns. That would be awesome. But this workation thing is, a little bit too much. Heartbeat asking, any more 2.5 Voyages in the pipeline? We don't have anything lined up, although any time. It's always just life is a little bit too busy for both of us. But yes, would love to do that. So this kind of this was just an interesting tweet that didn't show up properly. So here it is. I don't know why you have to call someone a cis man. And how do you know he's a cis man? Did you ask? I mean, who knows? And who cares what his gender is, honestly? But yes, the head of the Japanese Association of Obstetricians and Gynecologists saying that if we make the morning after pill more accessible, he's worried, and this is the head of the Gynecological Association, he's worried that young women will think, oh, that's okay, and not take it seriously. They'll just casually be taking after morning pills all the time. So there's a bit of a debate happening right now as to whether the morning after pill should be available over the counter in Japan, which it currently is not. This is a country which took 20 years to approve the contraceptive pill. At the same time, they actually passed Viagra on the special emergency diet session. They actually approved Viagra faster than any medicine in history. At the same time, they sort of held back approval for 20 years. In the end, in the late 90s, only Japan and North Korea had not approved the contraceptive pill. And again, it was people worrying that, women are just going to, have sex all over town if we allow them to have contraception. We must, for the sake of public morality, we need Viagra. Please, Viagra, we're going to rush that through. But, we don't want all these immoral women tempting us if they have contraception. And it's kind of the similar debate with the after morning pill. And the fact that the head of the Gynecological Association is actually like leading it. And by the way, they also opposed the contraceptive pill. Not a funny story, strange kind of thing about Japan is that part of the reason that they were speculated to, the gynecologist was supposed to have been opposing the contraceptive pill, is that they made a lot of money from abortions. I mean, abortions are big money for those doctors. And this is, I guess, another thing against that as well, that it's, they're thinking of their income from doing far more damaging things to women, which, again, you don't hear. Maybe it's just my life stage. I don't hear about it so much anymore. But when I was a university student and coming back and forth, and when I first came to Japan, you'd kind of hear about it a lot. So, yeah, Japan's still kind of in the dark ages, unfortunately, from the people who should be actually leading the way on this. So, that is what that is. Sexist as hell indeed. Aaron, there's more of that on the show. Speaking of Korean relations, this is another awkward moment. Right now, I mean, I was kind of almost nostalgic when Korea sued Japan and the World Trade Organization over the export trade restrictions, and that they're still having that court case right now. And, Japan and North Korea getting back into the old routine, the old manzai, kind of anyway, the sniping and horrible sort of things. And here we have again. Apparently, there was a not government run park. It's a privately run park in Seoul. Apparently, a botanical garden. They thought it'd be a great idea to make a statue of Shinzo Abe groveling for forgiveness in front of a comfort woman. The Japanese government said, "Not cool." They've set up funds for the comfort woman actually 3 times now. They've sent apologies, they've made money available for them, they've done all sorts of things around this. The Japanese government, I think, has sincerely tried to do things around this, but in the Korean side, it's highly politicized whether to even allow Japan to apologize for this. People often, and the rhetoric often is that we don't want money, we don't want a letter, we want Abe to personally grovel in front of us, ask for forgiveness. Is often the rhetoric. So someone thought that'd be a nice addition to the botanical garden, and they made it, and then. I don't even know why Japan actually reacts to this. It's kind of, in a way, it's kind of just predictable. But and it's also, this highlights exactly why. It's a bit like Charlie Brown trying to kick the football. In the end of the day, Korea doesn't have to forgive Japan, right? This is the point. Japan, they're under no obligation to accept any of the apologies that Japan gives. But it's always a little bit disingenuous when they say, "Hey, this time, you just apologize one more time, and this will be the final time, the final resolution," which is what the last one was with President Park. Every single time, they just hold the football. They hold the football there, and they say, "Just this time, you can kick it. I'll let you kick the ball this time." And every time they pull it away, and then that's going to be the game forever. And this just kind of shows that you're just never going to be able to resolve it. It's pretty awesome trolling. I mean, Korea's it has a strong troll game. What can we say? So, that's a thing that happened. What else do we have? If you were in Tokyo this week, you might have noticed, what day was this on? This was a couple of days ago. It's when I had my Kenko Shinan. I had my health checkup the other day. So that was, I think, on a Wednesday. My phone, I was bicycling home. I was coming up to a train line crossing, and my phone started making a wee, like a fire alarm noise, which is what phones do. You can actually turn this off, by the way. It is opt-out. It's not mandatory, but... yes, my phone was making the wailing noise that a large earthquake is imminent. A large earthquake is imminent. Find somewhere safe. I was outside, so I was kind of like, okay, sit where I am. Let's see how much it shakes. You don't often feel it so much actually when you're outside, and if you're in a building, especially the higher the floor you're on, you'll feel it a lot. But so I was waiting for it, and everyone was waiting for it. And yes, it's funny how it tweets about earthquakes. Don't do this, because I'm about to ruin your Twitter experience for quakes. You could put the phrase "that's what she said" after almost any tweet about an earthquake. I was judicious. There were so many people. It's like, I waited and waited and waited, and it never came. Or somebody said, I hardly feel anything. Uh, did it, did it happen? Is it finished yet? All these sorts of comments that people made. The quake never came. It was actually a misfire of the quake system, and a lot of people immediately started tweeting, well, if the quake system's going to issue false alerts, it's like the boy who cried wolf. People are not going to take it seriously, and that's going to be more dangerous. So they have to fix it. And yeah, that's kind of true. At the same time, what I said to everybody was, well, I used to work in a risk management consulting subsidiary of a large insurance company in Japan. And one of the divisions, it wasn't my team, but there was another team that was the earthquake team that would do assessments of earthquake risk, and they were involved in developing the technology that went into the Meteorological Service earthquake prediction system. And it's based on basically certain types of quakes. Not every quake. There's a bunch of different types of earthquakes, but one particular type of earthquake emits P waves just before the quake happens, like seconds before. And if you set up detectors for these P waves, you can, at least for those quakes, tell a few seconds ahead of time that a quake's about to happen. And the thought was, from an insurance company perspective and from the government perspective, that even a few seconds, it's enough to tell you to get out of bed or to move away from heavy furniture that might fall on you, which is how a lot of people died in Kobe. Even a few seconds, it can allow trains to put on brakes so that they don't get derailed. There's a lot you can do even with a few seconds warning. Sometimes it's up to 30 seconds that you get from this. And even if it's not all the quakes, so even if you're going to get earthquakes happen without the warning system working, for those ones where it happens, it's better to have any warning, even if it's not always accurate. Earthquake prediction, Japan's invested more than anyone in it, and this is the best that they can do right now. They're still not able to predict earthquakes, so they put this technology out there. But when they were testing this technology before it was available on everyone's phones in the early 2000s, I was working in a company that was involved in the development of the system, and they had the alarm set up in the office. And it was kind of funny. This thing would go off even if there's an earthquake anywhere in Japan. So half the time it would go off and nothing would ever happen. Or sometimes we'd get a quake in Tokyo, but it wouldn't be a P wave emitting quake, so it wouldn't go off. And every time, basically, all the engineers and all the people at this company would walk over to the earthquake team and say, "You're never going to be able to use that thing. It obviously doesn't work. It's a piece of crap." And they would just go and razz them every time we had a quake, which is pretty much what I saw on Twitter after this. And I said to everybody, look, if you were here in 2011, if you've ever experienced a large earthquake in Japan, I don't mind having a few false alarms. Honestly, I would rather know, and I'll take it seriously every time. I mean, this is something that in a few seconds could kill you. And if it's not even if it's false a couple of times, if I know to get away from something that could fall on me or to prop open the door so it doesn't get jammed and I don't get trapped in a room, there's things that you can do. And look. To me, the burden of opening a door, I'm not going to lose all trust over one false alarm. But yeah, the government did apologize for the false alarm. It was a big deal. It was a bit of excitement. It ended up not being very much happening, but there you go. Good night, Andrea Moboy. Have a good night, have a good night. I'm going to power through the next 7 minutes with the remaining topics that we have. I just mentioned before, 88,000 foreigners now can re-enter. I said re-enter, Sexius Maximus. There you go. I said it twice. So double the excitement. Li Ting-hui, I think it's Li Ting. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing the name perfectly, but he's a cool dude. Taiwan's father of democracy. It's kind of funny. This guy was the first. He basically set up democracy in Taiwan. I know as much about Taiwan as I know about Hong Kong, which is enough to have a short conversation. But immediately, probably if I go into too much detail, it would come up as being misinformed. So I want to be a little bit careful. But this guy is the first Taiwanese-born president of the Republic of China. The Republic of China is the government of China that is based in Taipei. That still officially claims sovereignty over all of China. They're effectively an opposition party to the Communist Party, competing for the government of China. And they sat. Remember, the Kuomintang sat in the United Nations until 1972, I think. in the China Sea. So basically the world recognized Taipei not as the capital of Taiwan, but as the capital of all of China. And they still call themselves the government, the Republic of China. The story of how the KMT became in charge of Taiwan was basically they evacuated from the mainland en masse, and they basically imposed martial law and did a couple of massacres and did some really horrible things immediately, imposing control on Taiwan. And part of the reason that they did that was the government of Taiwan, the Republic of China government, did not trust the Taiwanese. The Taiwanese had been incorporated as part of Japan since the Sino-Japanese War in the late 19th century, and everyone born there, compared to Korea, it's kind of funny. You colonize Korea and they hate you forever, as we just saw. Taiwan went kind of through the same thing, and yet there's a lot of Taiwanese who speak really fondly of Japan, partly because their experience of getting colonized by the mainland after World War II was a lot more negative than the experience of Japanese colonialism. Not to say that it was all good. I mean, Japan, by some accounts, did pretty horrible things, and there were people in Taiwan who wanted to be free from Japanese rule. But that said, Taiwanese were Japanese citizens. Taiwan was incorporated into Japan the same as Okinawa, the same as Sakhalin, the same as, it was a regular part of Japan. And Lee was born in Taiwan when it was part of Japan. So he was born a Japanese citizen. He was educated at Imperial University in Kyoto, and he served in the Japanese military during World War II. He rose up within the KMT as a rare Taiwanese member of the KMT, which had imposed martial law in Taiwan from like when it arrived in 1950, was it 1953 or something that they arrived in Taiwan, right through the late 1980s. And when he became president of Taiwan, I say president of Taiwan, that's in truth what he was, but it was the Republic of China. He was the first Taiwanese person to be elected into that role, and he changed the whole thing. He set it up so that there were direct elections for president, and he set up the framework for the amazingly actually vibrant and very successful democracy that the Republic of China in Taiwan has today, including the nudge towards Taiwan just becoming a country on its own, which of course freaked out China. A lot of people in the KMT also resent the fact he built up this sort of Taiwanese identity. And they also resent the fact that he loves Japan so much. He speaks fluent Japanese. He comes over to Japan. He recently passed away, but he traveled to Japan a lot and emphasized how Taiwan's destiny was intertwined with Japan's. And he was a great Japanophile. And I had people on Twitter saying that, people in China saw him suspiciously because he is such a Japanophile, but he was a Japanophile because he was from Taiwan. And frankly, that's what the KMT and the Communist Party both resented, was they don't want Taiwanese people to have power in Taiwan. He's a really cool guy with a really interesting backstory. He speaks excellent Japanese. I mean, he was born Japanese and into adulthood. So I think 22 years he was a Japanese citizen. He was sort of said himself. So really fascinating guy. The father of democracy in Taiwan. He's passed away, but that is a thing, and it's interesting to see Taiwan again, the situation it's in now, and it is close to Japan. I do believe that Japan should try to show it. Well, I think Japan shows its support as it can. China is also important for it, but I think now more than ever it's important to show support for the Republic of China, Chinese Taipei, or Taiwan, and basically Taiwan. Another thing that's happened this week, YouTube has stopped community contributions. This is a thing you might not know about, but I could say to all of you, hey, subtitle my show, put captions on, and I can allow people who subscribe to the show or whatever, subscribe to this channel, to come and make and submit for me that I would be able to review and approve subtitles for the show, both captions in English and translations into any language. And maybe not for a long format show like this, but for short format shows. This is actually a way that a lot of creators have built up channels, and captions are important not just for hard of hearing people, and community contributions, which allow people to create captions for their favorite shows, which make those shows more accessible, and they increase the amount of content available for hard of hearing people. Also for language learners, and making content available across languages. It's a great thing. It's been around for a long time. However, YouTube is bad. They're getting rid of the feature, and they're getting rid of the feature because it's not being widely enough used for them to justify continuing it. And they say that there's been a problem with abuse and spam in subtitles, like people slipping in rude messages that people overlook, and they put it on, and then people people complain about it. However, some people, including Loretta from Twitter, she's got a great Japanese channel. I'm trying to remember her YouTube channel name, which is not, it's stuck, but there are a lot of people who use this and rely on this, have communities of fans who follow their channels that create these captions, and it's a way that they interact, and they've never had problems with abuse or spam, and they rely on this, and YouTube's just killing it, and that's really disruptive and disappointing. And to me, this is unfortunately what Google's just become. I think, I've talked about this before. Google kind of became uncool to me when they got rid of Google Reader. Nowadays, Google's just at such a scale. Unless you've got millions of people using features, they just don't want to economically invest in them, even if they're cool and helpful and beneficial, which this clearly is. So it's disappointing. I do wish that they would, I hope that they will allow, I don't know, community, something like MyChan, where you could be able to add subtitles yourself, like using an overlay or something like that, if they're going to take it away as a native feature. But Kimushi-chan, thank you, Sergeant Buko. I was stuck on that. Indeed, Quint Ranked, you said it first. That is correct, Kimushi-chan. So disappointed, but again, that's kind of the way that YouTube's going. If it's not used by like millions of people, it just doesn't survive. President Lee, sad to see him go. This is a tweet, what is this tweet of? Don't know. Never mind, we'll go to the next one. The reason that the government says that we don't need a state of emergency declaration is because there are only 16 serious cases in Tokyo in spite of 500 cases being reported. Again, this is because 70% of the cases are people between 20 and 30, and they're finding these cases by going out and mass testing in the host and hostess bar districts and whatnot. They're finding all the people and they're doing very aggressive contact tracing. To me, it still is, when you're talking about numbers that extensive, it's a matter of time before you start having a lot of elderly people in more serious cases. And to me, you should have the state of emergency in order to prevent it getting, becoming a problem. The fact that the government's saying that they're not going to declare a state of emergency until they have hundreds of dying elderly people is causing a lot of criticism. But the government is still pushing so hard on trying to get the economy rebooted, and they want to delay it as long as possible. And to me, it's kind of funny. You talk about the success of Japan in this. Maybe it really is Mindo. Maybe it really is certainly Japanese people deserve the credit and their individual efforts, their reliability for wearing masks or whatever. The classiness of people here has got definitely a lot more to do with it than any initiative of the government. The government's just pretty much sat around and thought about what are the worst things we could do, and are doing that. The Titanic. Jason wanted to know, Sainted Sir, good to see you there. The Titanic, he asked why this was there. This was a story featured on Unseen Japan, which again I've been enjoying following on Twitter and on RSS for their blog content. There was a fella called Hosono Masabumi, who I think was from Niigata, who there was a Japanese person on the Titanic, and when the Titanic sank, he ended up in the water, like a lot of the men did. However, he was pulled onto a lifeboat by one of the lifeboats that was around there, and was ultimately able to survive the sinking of the Titanic. The story is basically that when he got back to Japan, it was considered a national shame that he had survived when so many people had died, and that he had allowed himself to be pulled onto a lifeboat. And it was somehow sort of selfish and shunned. Basically, he was he was working at the time as an engineer for the Japanese government, a job from which he was fired, although because he was so good at the job, they rehired him on a contract basis. But he was like a kind of a shame celebrity for having survived the Titanic, and people were suggesting he should have committed ritual suicide, which seems a little bit harsh, but there you go. So, it's... this is, of course, from, I guess, the Taisho period, when the Titanic sank, but that is a fascinating story, and it turns out, when I tweeted about this, some people on Twitter said, they lived in Niigata, and people still talk about this guy. Japan can be harsh. Tuwaiwai, good to see you there. Indeed, that's what she said. Challenge, next time you see an earthquake on Twitter, challenge to use that's what she said as much as possible. That is the ending the captions feature. It's kind of funny. The ex-governor of Tokyo, Shintaro Ishihara, He's like nearly 100 now. He's like so old. The guy who got us the Olympics, the guy who has put up numerous racist and discriminatory posts. He's written books denying the Nanking massacre. He and whatever. He is also popular just for, he's like a radio, like he's like an outspoken right-wing radio host. He says what a lot of people think but don't feel like they're allowed to say, but he says it anyway. So the case of this ALS person, euthanasia case in the news, he says that ALS is a karma disease. People who get it, it's just karma, that they probably deserve it. And he apologized for that. But my reaction to this and everything else that the former governor says is the governor, Shintaro, he's proof that only good people die young, because he's nearly like 100 and he's still putting out bile like that. So there you go. I had a debate, a vigorous debate earlier today with people about there are these Meiwaku YouTubers, these YouTubers who go around doing outrageous, crazy things like crossing the Shibuya Kosaten on a bed with wheels, and just doing silly stunts basically for YouTube. Not just obviously a Japan exclusive thing, but this one particular person who had coronavirus, and while having coronavirus was still going around doing outrageous things. He did a video where he was basically walking around a supermarket where he went to the sushi section. He just opened it up and started eating the sashimi raw while he was walking around the supermarket before getting to the counter. He did, after getting to the counter, pay, and they accepted the payment after the fact. However, the police, who were getting so many complaints about this COVID-19 positive person running all over the place doing these things, when they saw in one of the videos that he was eating the sushi before that he went to the checkout, they charged him with theft and have arrested him. It's very typical. This is like where the police will arrest people suspected of murder for improper handling of a body, and they'll hold them on that for as long as they can so that they can gather evidence for the murder charge. The police are pretty good in Japan. Same with closing down nightclubs for people dancing when it's really just reacting to a lot of residents complaining about the noise. They can't arrest or shut a place down purely for that, but they'll go in and they'll say as soon as they see one person dancing, they can shut them down. Because of an obscure law from the 1950s. A little bit the same here. They just sort of saw they got lots of complaints about this person, and they arrested him for theft, for basically consuming something before getting to the checkout. Some people have talked about whether there was some people are saying that it's fine so long as you pay for it. You can eat while you're waiting in the checkout line, and some people claim that they know lots of people that do that. Personally, just personal opinion, editorial maybe. I'm getting a little bit old, but for me, apart from the fact that it's definitely gross, it's also, hey, Shubas from Panama, good to have you here. I feel like who raises their kids that they're allowed to eat before they pay? I mean, technically it is conversion. You are actually taking possession of it before you pay for it. That is actually stealing, even if you can correct it later on or whatever, or get a pass for it. But for me, that's like, no, you're not allowed to do that. The idea, and of course, you go to convenience stores and you go to supermarkets, and sometimes you'll see people snacking away. But when I look at those people, I think, were you raised by wolves? Like, did human beings raise you? Did you have a mother who said to you not to do that? Because, man, I think what would have happened to me if I did something like that. So, I'm on team arrest the dude for that. That's perfectly okay with me. A lot of people said, hey, I know people who do that all the time. It's outrageous to arrest someone for theft, for eating before they get to the counter. But I say go for it. Now, I guess this is the little Shintaro Ishihara voter inside of me. Finally, on the proposed. What I think this is, two people, a 45-year-old member of the tax bureau of the Japan Tax Agency based in Sapporo, and a 22-year-old unemployed sidekick, apparently were running a large marijuana growing operation that they were selling. Perfect, I guess, having a tax agency employee, civil servant. Running, I guess they would have been able to disguise the income from it. The police have arrested them, caught them with 1,000 plants. They fired National Tax Agency fired the employee who did this. And my call for this is that the Japanese TV has to make a Japanese version of Breaking Bad based on this. Some fun facts. Cannabis, or a very, very mild form of cannabis, is indigenous to Japan. Actually, it's a really important part of Shinto. Japanese, after the war, the hemp industry, the emperor was the patron of the Japanese hemp industry, which was tied both with Shinto religion, as well as the fact that Japanese, basically made all sort of cloth and whatever. There were no synthetic materials like rayon and nylon. It was all hemp based. And when GHQ was in Japan, they quickly tried to outlaw the hemp industry in order to get Japan to buy these petroleum-based synthetic materials. So as part of this sort of demonization, and the demonization of cannabis was so complete that it went from being an accepted part of, native plant of Japan and a huge industry patroned by the emperor, that now this is considered a Pablo Escobar type thing. There is no differentiation between hard drugs and soft drugs in Japan. They're all treated as ultra hard, and this is kind of an outrageous case. But the funny thing is, there were bus tours that used to go up to Hokkaido because cannabis grows wild in Hokkaido, and you can actually get on a bus in some parts of Hokkaido, and it grows beside the road, beside the highway. The Ministry of Transport is up there trying to cut down all the marijuana growing wild there. Apparently it's not as strong as the sort of stuff that people, grow for the purpose of illicit drugs, but, it's all over the place up there, and it's native. So very appropriate in a way that this was in Sapporo. The real Japanese, it's literally like Jesse and Walter White there. It's to me that they've got to make a TV series out of that. So quickly smoke the evidence. 1,000 plants. Tekart too. At least he wasn't able to return the food. At least he wasn't asked to return the food. Well, indeed, Tekart. That's a good point about the previous story. Final story. I think this is the final story. God, I hope it is. Oh, there's the Okinawa thing. Oh, and there's okay, 3 more stories. I'm going to power through this. The Japanese government has been criticized lately, although it signed on to the Hague Convention for basically when you have a divorce with a Japanese person and you live in Japan, there is no family court or custody system for post-divorce custody of children, which means that although you can agree to pay child support and whatnot, alimony, there's no enforcement system for that, and there's no court-based rights of access to kids. In fact, the general custom is that when you divorce, your families entirely separate and one family gets the kid, and they think the kind of thinking is that it's confusing for the kid to have access to both parents. Now the science globally on this is fairly settled that it is basically bad for the child to suddenly lose access to a parent, and it's actually trauma inducing and induced to equivalent to a form of child abuse. And this kind of logic has taken hold in almost every country in the world with family law systems. Japan, however, doesn't have a family law system, and it doesn't have this logic yet, even though it sort of is acknowledged globally. And the result of this is that there's a lot of people in cross-border child. Well, first of all, there's a lot of people in Japan, Japanese people, particularly fathers. It used to be that when you would marry, because you would often have grandparents, you'd have multi-generations in the same house, and often it would be the grandparents who would look after the kids while the parents would work. It would also be very common, particularly in the case where if it was the eldest son, that in the case of divorce, which used to be super rare, it would be the elder parents, it'd be the grandparents of the eldest son, it'd be the dad, their parents that would look after the kids. So it's not necessarily that it would always be the mother, but of course what's happened more recently is marriage in places like Tokyo is more typically now like in other countries where it's just parents and children, and when they divorce, it's more often than not the mother that gets the custody by default. And this is why not exclusively men, but it's mostly men both in Japan and overseas who have brought cases where they want Japan to set up a family law system and a system of custody like in other countries, which acknowledges the interests of the child and the need for the child and for the parents, frankly, to have some system of access, child custody, joint custody and access in the case of divorce. In the absence of the system, what happened was if you were in America, there were a lot of cases of Japanese mothers in particular, sometimes fathers, but more often mothers. When they were in a custody dispute or a divorce, they would grab the kids, fly back to Japan. And in Japan, there's no mechanism to give the father access to the child at all in the case of divorce. And effectively, this is something global. This is a global problem called parental child abduction. in the case of custody disputes, where they can run away to a country and get an order to prevent the other parent getting access. And to resolve it, there is an international treaty called the Hague Convention on Parental Aspects of Child Abduction, which exists, which is basically that if you have a child custody, if you have joint child custody in America and you snatch the kid away and run away to Japan to try to get an advantage, the Japanese court under the Hague Convention will enforce the American custody order. Well, first of all, they'll send the kid back to where they were, so that they don't get an advantage. But if the kid becomes too settled in Japan or wherever they are, they will apply the U.S. family court rules and ensure the rights, the parental and child rights that they would have under the fight. They will enforce the finding of the court in the other country. So Japan, after a lot of pressure, signed up to the Hague Convention. The problem is, of course, that Japan doesn't have a family law system to enforce it, and the absence of this family court system is basically a cause for a Supreme Court case recently by mainly dads, mostly Japanese, but some foreign dads also came up to this and said that the Ministry of Justice was violating the Constitution by not having a family law system, and that it was also breaching the Hague Convention, because although there have been cases where Japan has agreed to return children to foreign jurisdictions now since the Hague Convention was signed. For children that have habitual residence in Japan, where they won't send them back, where they're too settled, and they'll do it here, the courts here don't have the means to enforce foreign orders. So recently, on July 8th, the European Parliament criticized Japan, saying that its lack of a family, a means for enforcing joint custody was tantamount to a violation of this treaty that they signed up to, and was child abusive. So pretty harshly worded. It was sponsored by, it was promoted by some lobbying from some, again, parents in Europe who have kids in Japan that they don't have access to. The Japanese Parliamentarian Association put a statement out about this on July 30th, saying that this is misinformed and lies and misleading, and we meet all of our obligations under the Hague Convention. And the foreign ministry says, well, the problems with the law system, that's up to the Ministry of Justice, and the Ministry of Justice doesn't want to know about it. The Ministry of Justice points out that it has been going through updates and upgrades to the Japanese family law system, which they've actually had 7 hearings, have been researching systems in other countries, but they've only been focused on the question of alimony and payments, not on the question of child custody. So they haven't paid any attention to that. There have been some blogs on this which have been pointing out that, again, Japanese government is just acting sort of tone deaf and ignoring this still, and this causes a lot of harm to the kids, to the parents, and to Japanese people as well as foreign people. And it's not really, the Hague Convention was never going to fix it if there was no enforcement mechanism within Japan. So it's a big problem. It still is, and it's something, if you are getting married in Japan and have kids in Japan, it's something you got to know about, that you, especially if you're a dad, that you basically have no rights. Divorce is the same as, say, divorcing your kids, which is clearly bad for the kids as well. The Japanese, good on the European Parliament for putting pressure on Japan to actually correct the situation when Japan has just shown no motivation for fixing it itself. So serious issue, and that is that. The second one I've got here, this is the per capita rates per 10,000 people. 18.38 cases per 10,000 people in Okinawa now in the last week. In Tokyo, 15. So basically in Fukuoka, the third. So in terms of the places with the highest per population rates of COVID-19 in Japan right now, Okinawa has suddenly jumped to number 1 from being nowhere. Tokyo is next. Then Fukuoka, Osaka, Aichi, Miyazaki, Kumamoto. So Kyushu, it's really spreading around a lot. The situation with Okinawa, I said at the start of the video, apart from the US military have had a lot of cases, and some of these have coincided with irresponsible behavior by US military personnel, which is disappointing. But also, of course, Okinawa right now. Okinawa's in this situation. They've declared a state of emergency against the government's wishes, and the government's subsidizing people to travel down there still. At the same time as they're trying to close tourist facilities to try to limit the spread. So it's a real mess, and the Okinawan government's actually in a fight with the central government to try to control this, and the central government's trying to undermine that. The second final story, very simple. Between August 8 and 14, it's predicted that the east part of Japan that you see there in the red is going to be hotter than usual. It will be about normal in West Japan in orange, and for the second half of August, it's going to be much hotter than usual this year. Japan summers always suck, but they're going to especially suck really badly for the rest of this year, at least for the rest of August. So get ready for that. I don't know what I'm going to do about running. I guess I'm going to run shorter distances today. I actually picked up an Aquarius partway through so I could drink it while I ran. But yeah, that sucks. But this is it. Rainy season's over. Yay. Summer, not so great. I mean, autumn is their season in Japan, and hopefully this will be over soon. Again, it's crazy to be thinking about doing the Olympics at this time of year, although I guess it would have been in the rain, which actually would have been okay. The temperature-wise, it was okay. But that's what we have. Those are all the topics for tonight. Wow, I went 1 hour 15. I did have a lot. I did say that I had that. Good to see you, Nesta125, and other people there in the comments. Hiko Simon, we can start a family law business. Indeed, it would. There's a lot of demand for it, and there are a lot of people in the family law industry in Japan who make a lot of money doing the wrong things. So yeah, Tech Art 2, what is considered hot? You're going to have to help me, but for a start, the humidity is crazy here. So although like in Australia, you'd very easily get 40 degrees, 41 degrees on peak days. In Japan, it never really gets much above 40. In Tokyo, it generally never gets much above 35, 36. But that's really unpleasant. There's no shade. It's all concrete, 35, 36, and about 90% humidity. You go out and it's like being in a pool, which is 35 degrees. You'd have to convert that into Fahrenheit. I think it's around 100, but it's a really unpleasant 100. It's not like a desert 100. It's a really humid. So it's very unpleasant. It's basically the same climate as Singapore for about 2 months. But there you go. Smash through at the end. Almost time for you to rewind, Shubis, and see the rest. Steve Miller, excellent to see you. And with a black Yeti on a shock mount, yes, that's damn straight. Matches the shirt. Excellent to see you all. Again, I ran through the topics. Remember, as always, you can follow me on... did I miss any super chats this week? I thought I saw the super chat mark at one point, and I looked. I'm just going to quickly check that I didn't miss any. I'm worried that I did. I don't see a super chat mark. I'm just going to do a double... I don't see, so that's good. But yes, remember, as always, you can keep up with me during the weekend. You can talk with me. You can interact with me on Twitter. That's where I am. I don't really use Facebook anymore. Twitter's where I am. This is all based on Twitter. It's great to have you guys all here every week. Let me do my therapy talking about this. Have a good week, everybody. Stay safe. Do not get the Rona. Remember to say that's what she said after earthquake tweets. And yeah, see you next week. Keep cool. Remember, it's going to be hot, so use aircon. Stay inside, and have a good week, everybody. Good to see you all as always, and great to see so many awesome people there in the comments. Have a good week. Boom. Peace. Good night. In stream. See ya. I'll try to get these comments fixed for next week.